Hi guys, and welcome back to the Backstage Bikini podcast with your host, myself, Jade.
And this is Grace.
And jumping in on you there, Grace. But today we've got a largely anticipated guest for myself and Grace. So we've been patiently in the background, like now, and we've finally sort of braved it, asked Phoebe to come on the podcast. So you will all know exactly who she is, I am sure. But we've got the Posing Portal CEO, right? And
yes.
a IFBB Olympian, Phoebe Hagan. Hello, Phoebe.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me. Like I said earlier, I haven't done a podcast for ages, but I was like, when you asked, I was like, I'm so excited for a catch up, especially from UK gals as well. So it's gonna be a lot of fun to kind of like just catch up with everything for sure. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we've been absolutely buzzing. It's like we've been waiting. We're like, okay, you had the Olympia prep, so we were like, okay, after, and then you were on the high from that, and then we saw you were doing the Arnolds. I was like, right, this is our chance before it gets too difficult, before you're back in a prep hole. So yeah, we're buzzing to have you on.
Thank you so much. And to be fair, good timing, because next week I'm actually going to the UK and then going to Paris and then going back to Vegas.
Crazy.
To prep for the last few weeks. So yeah, so
Lovely.
crazy. So good timing. Very good timing.
Amazing. So to get into Phoebe, I suppose, give the listeners kind of a rundown about who you are. We're not going to, I suppose, spend the whole podcast going through the start of your journey, but you want to just tell us a little bit about you, how you got into competing, and I suppose your journey as an amateur transitioning into a pro.
Okay, so my name's Phoebe Hagan. I'm Bikini Pro from the UK. I've been competing for 7 years now, and I started my journey back in 2016. And the first show that I did was actually, it wasn't an IFBB show or an NPC show. It was a university-based federation called Mass SPC, because I was obviously at the time I was in university, and I didn't know what it was. I was getting into the gym, and my boyfriend Max was literally like, why don't you just jump in and see what it's about? Like, do you enjoy it? Do you want to do it and go forwards with it or anything like that? I did a 4-week prep. Do not advise anyone to ever do that in your life. Like, it's just not the best idea ever. We rushed into it. But the second I stepped on that stage, like, I was absolutely in love. So I started to research more, got a coach. And then that was pretty much the rest is history. So in 2018, we then got my IFBB Pro card. And then since 2018 till 2021, we've been chasing to get to the Olympia, which has been, Adam always says it's been a tough journey. I think it's been a great journey. Like, I've loved my journey towards this, because like I look back and I'm like, God, imagine if I'd stopped, or imagine if I just gave up, or just thought, you know what, I'm not good enough. Like, looking back at all my videos on YouTube and all that type of thing, there was so many times where I was like, am I good enough for this? Do I really think I can get there? And it's really cool to see that I just kept going, you know? But yeah, so from 2018 to 2021, that's how long it took for me to get to the Olympia. So it took me about 2 years to get my pro card, and then 4 years to get my Olympia qualification. So it's been a long journey, but it's been one that I wouldn't change, like I said.
Yeah, incredible. No, it's an incredible story, and I'll never forget. I know you've talked about on Adam's podcast a lot, but how close you were to getting the Olympia qualification. Yeah. I remember you came first in one pro show, but it was the only show of that year or something that they weren't qualifying.
Yeah,
even that. So and I was like, oh,
that year it was like points. So in 2018 to 19, it was the point system, which was like you had to get into that top 20. And even if you won a show for, I think it was bikini, men's physique, and classic, because those categories are quite large, you had to do it 3 points. So even if you won, it was just a large amount of points. So I remember I got into that top 20, I snuck in, I was 18th, and then the next week I got 6th, which isn't, you don't get any points if you get 6th, and then other girls overtook me. So it's just that, and I'm glad that they took that kind of system out, because it was so hard to you just have to keep going, unless you started really, really early and you were just winning shows from the top. It was so hard to get that amount of points. I think it was something ridiculous. I think it was Issa Pacini. She had 30 something points, or 40 points, at the top. So obviously she's not going to get touched. But it's so difficult when you're at that bottom and you're just trying to chase those last final points. So I'm glad they've changed it. They've actually changed it again this year to just you when you're into the entire point system is completely out now, which is cool.
Easy.
Yeah, because I think the volume, there were so many bikini girls there at the Olympia this year, weren't there? What was it? Was there 56?
So I thought it was 58. So I think 58 were qualified and only 54 were on stage. Because I know a few people did get qualified and they decided to pull out because of health reasons and stuff like that. But yeah, I especially it being like the biggest Olympia ever, like I was like, no pressure, like this is like gonna be huge. And everyone was always saying like it's gonna be impossible to stand out, like especially with, you know, there was Janet, Issa, Laura Lee, Jen, like all of these, you know, Miss Olympias. I know Laura Lee's an Miss Olympia, but a lot of the Miss Olympias were kind of like doing this show. I think it was the most Miss Olympias this year. It was like everyone was just saying it's impossible to get into that top 10 if you're not them. I was like, okay,
well, it was
yeah,
impossible.
I was like, let's try. Let's try.
Oh,
so,
no,
I'm so happy with the outcome.
Yeah, I think your story, Phoebe, everybody has been following for so long, like your journey through all. How many shows did you do in total when you earned your pro card?
I don't know how many shows that I did until from like beginning of the journey to pro card, but I've done 37 shows in total. Like Olympia was my 37th show in 7 years. So yeah, it was pretty nuts how many shows that I did to get here, but it was great. It was obviously, like I said, I wouldn't change it because it just adds to my story, it adds to my journey. And like that's what Adam said to me from 2019, 20, all that type of thing, when I was like so close. He was like, it just adds to your story, and that's kind of stuck with me a lot. And I think it's nice because I think I see a lot of, especially now, a lot of UK pros, you know, doing the exact same. They want to get to the Olympia, like that's the next step, right? And they're trying to get there and they're missing it like I did. I'm like, it just adds to your story. Like it's not like you're not good enough, because you are, because you've got to this level. It's just a case of just keep going, just keep showing up.
I think there's been a lot of stories like the last like year or so of like people going amateur, pro, and then going straight to the Olympia. And I think a lot of people almost feel like they can rush that, when in fact, no, it does take years, and you have to go through everything that you've been through, and it does eventually come, do you know? And then when you did get to the Olympia, you came 7th, do you know, that kind of way. So like,
I think that's what makes it best thing for me. It was kind of like, and that's kind of what I wanted to kind of like, I kept on saying like, here to shock, I want to like show up and like show them what I'm made of type thing, because like I've really, really worked so hard to get to this position that I'm in now. So I really don't want to waste it. And I think it's the same. And all the other times, I think I said this before, if I got an Olympia qualification 19, 18, 2020, 2021, I honestly don't think I was ready like for the Olympia, like to step on that stage and like be a contender. Whereas this year I felt like an actual contender, which I think I earned my way to the Olympia. And that's what I always try and say to people, like you have to earn your way to your pro card, to the Olympia, everything in between, which I know is sometimes hard to hear, because obviously we all work so hard. And sometimes it's just a case of waiting and seeing what happens and like just building up. But yeah, so I think it's sometimes hard to hear, but it honestly adds to the journey so much better when you've like really worked it. It just makes it feel so much better.
Yeah, I think I can resonate. A lot of amateurs even can kind of resonate with that. You know, I myself last year get really kind of disheartened, and that's where, you know, when you look at the pros, you're going through very similar things what us amateurs go through. We just have to keep fighting, you know, and it's been an inspiration to my journey. But
well, thank you. I love like being that person that people could be like, well, she did it, and she like, you know, she got knocked down a fair few times as well. So if I get knocked down, I can do exactly what Phoebe does, and I can get straight back up, you know. So that's something I always want to try and aspire to be.
Amazing.
Did you, with that, Phoebe, as well, like talking about like sort of the time frames you explained before, you're talking 2 years up to sort of your pro card and then 4 years to gain that Olympia qualification. Like, was there a big difference in terms of like, did your determination sort of develop over that time? Did the pro card win feel like the Olympia win, or has that been something that just progressively your drive just got that little bit hungrier, because obviously the ranks changed, I suppose the prize or the goal changes, right? And the size of the goal. What was that like? Is it comparable or is it completely different?
I think It's a very similar feeling, if I'm honest, because it's like that one big goal that you've been working towards at that time. So like for me, my pro cards, I think my pro card and my Olympia reaction was both the exact same. It was both like head grab, oh my God, I can't believe I've just done this, like, thank God type thing. It's in that moment kind of like, okay, cool, goal achieved. It was never like when I was, you know, an amateur, I was thinking about the Olympia, because I haven't got that stepping stone just yet, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So like the first stepping stone was the pro card, and then it's like, okay, now Olympia. So once I got the pro card, I was like, right, now the Olympia. But the reaction when I was like up there, or like when I was working towards it, was still the same, if that makes sense. So yeah, I feel like when I got my Olympia qualification, like, oh, it was the best thing ever, because obviously it was in the UK on home ground. So it felt amazing. And it was when I got my pro card, obviously it was in Spain. So it was kind of similar, there's similar reactions. But no, I think the same drive will go towards both of them. And the same reaction was kind of the both, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I want to talk a little bit, I suppose, about your Arnolds UK prep versus the kind of Olympia prep. And you spoke a bit, I like, about kind of obviously the Arnolds being in the UK. Like, did you feel almost like more pressure for the Arnolds than you did the Olympia, or what was the difference between those two preps?
So I feel like definitely more pressure for the Olympia, because for me, obviously, and I haven't spoken much about, I've spoken a little bit about it, but not much, because like I feel like it's not something that needs to be spoken about. But sometimes I feel the pressure of being the only UK athlete on like stages, if that makes sense, which sometimes, you know, I've spoken to, like, for example, Adam and stuff like that about it before, where it's been like, sometimes it gets to me a little bit. And I think sometimes I don't know how to control it, because obviously you just have to kind of like be in yourself or whatnot. But I sometimes feel that pressure a lot more. So like this Olympia, I really tried to make sure that I was like, I don't need to represent, because I'm on stage for me, if that makes sense. And like whatever happens when I'm up there on stage, everyone's going to be proud of me. So I don't need to just be like, have the weight of, you know, the UK on my shoulders, if that makes sense. Because I definitely had that at the Arnolds in 2022. And that pressure I cracked massively. And especially I don't want that pressure going into this Arnold's either, and I don't want that pressure going into the Olympia either. But I think the more I started to get into the prep, like for the Olympia, I didn't feel that pressure, because people were just like, whatever happens, like, you've shown us your journey, like, we're all proud of you, like, just keep going, like, you're an inspiration type thing. So I'm like, okay, cool. Like, they don't care where I, like, you know, what I place or what I do or anything like that, but they're happy with the journey that I've showed them, if that makes sense. Yeah. So that's one thing. I think the other thing that made a huge difference to this prep, for my Olympia prep, versus the Arnolds UK, is because I was in Vegas. And honestly, I'm definitely going to do that this year. And this is why I made the decision. I haven't actually announced it, but I'm going to do that for the Arnolds as well. So I'm going to the UK, obviously, to do some seminars and all that type of thing, and then go to Vegas, I think 5 weeks before this Arnolds. And I'll definitely be going back to Vegas for this year's Olympia as well. Just because the mentality, or if I'm honest, the actual atmosphere that Adam has created in Vegas with the prep house and the people there, it's something that I didn't think I needed. But now being here, I'm like, I want to just be there, if that makes sense, especially being surrounded by a lot of Olympians. A lot of people now have moved to Vegas. That community over there is just bodybuilder hub in certain areas, obviously. So for me, I was just completely focused. Like, I got to train with, you know, Jen Dory, was speaking to people like Nick Walker on like a daily basis. And it's the conversations you have with those types of people. I didn't really realize how much I loved bodybuilding until I spoke to those like people, if that makes sense, or how far I wanted to go. Because there's always, for me, I've always not wanted to be looked at as just an athlete. And if I'm honest, they're the exact same, but the way that they think when they're in prep is like a whole different level. And for me, it was really nice to kind of get that same vibe whilst I was in the prep for the biggest show. So yeah, it was very inspiring. And I think that was one of the main reasons why my prep was so successful, so easy. And my body just responded very well, because I was happy in my environment. So I think my Olympia prep 100% was better than my Arnold's prep. just because of those reasons.
Amazing.
I mean, it's interesting. You touched on the expectations and the pressure there, Phoebe, like without us sort of prompting, but that was going to be one of our questions, because obviously you are the front running UK IFBB bikini athlete. No, but you are, like, the reality is you are. And I think like it's refreshing, but equally really understandable, I'm sure, from the listener's point of view as well, that you carry that mantle and that kind of pressure. But in terms of sort of being in your own space this time, obviously you've touched on like the environment at the Olympia and in Vegas and stuff like that. Does it help to really hone yourself in sort of leading into shows? And just because I think you've commented on it, I used to watch your YouTube like in my first bikini preps during cardio. It was a great watch, by the way. But I think you've touched on it a few times before, and you can definitely, obviously the more open you are about it, you can definitely see the difference in terms of how you feel and how happy you seem to be on stage when you focus in on yourself. So how's that been in terms of sort of like managing all the other things that you've got on your plate at the moment, all the other pressures? How's it been to sort of navigate that?
I feel like it's obviously, it's different every prep, if I'm honest. I feel like this time around, obviously starting a prep in Dubai and then obviously going to the UK and then going back to Vegas, that's something different, because obviously before, you know, the Olympia prep, I did start over here, but then the majority of my prep was in Vegas. So for me, I really just trying to enjoy the process of it a little bit more versus it being like just about me and thinking about the pressures. For example, obviously, like I was saying about being, you know, the UK front runner, all that type of thing.
Yeah.
I was like, I'm focusing on the process of how this preps makes me feel versus how other people perceive it, if that makes sense. So like for me, I think a lot of people say, like, for example, like, you know, you're going to do really well or you're going to do this, and I'm like, I'm going to see how my body responds. I'm going to obviously listen to my coach. I'm going to, like, you know, all those types of kind of sayings is sometimes hard to take in when I'm like at that level. I'd rather just kind of block out the noise almost sometimes and just listen to certain people, if that makes sense. So sometimes it is hard when people are saying, oh, you're going to do this, you're going to do that, and you know, you obviously want to do those things, but you just need to focus on you. So for me, I find a prep a lot easier when I'm just kind of like, I'm not telling myself, oh yeah, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, which is interesting because I had a lot of conversations with people over in Vegas and other pros, and they do the opposite. So for me, it's like, it's so interesting to hear the different types of ways people get kind of like ready for shows and like their mindset and stuff. Because for me, my mindset, if I say like, you know, all this type of thing, and for me, it doesn't help. Whereas for them it does. So it's really interesting to see the different types of mindsets that people put themselves through. But no, I find just focusing on myself and just kind of like saying, we'll see what happens, because nothing's predictable, is best for me. But even so, this Olympia, I think the last few weeks, especially after Texas, I was like, I want this. Like, I was saying it openly out loud and just being like, I'm here to shock. I want this now. So once I'd had those conversations and started to believe in myself a bit more, it was a case of like, no, I do want this. And like, whatever happens, I do think that this can happen, you know? So it is scary to kind of put yourself out there to kind of say those things though. But no, I think this prep, it was definitely an experiment in terms of mindset.
I actually 100% relate to that, because even with my prep last year, like I had all these voices of, you're going to do this, you're going to do this. People, you do YouTube like you, and you have people commenting and messaging you, and it's like, it's so hard to kind of block out the noise, and you do feel that pressure. And then when you don't achieve that goal, you feel like you're letting people down. So I 100% get what you're coming at. It's like, as competitors, like mindsets are so different. And I feel like even over in the US, like their mindset is different, you know, and they can say that they're going after these things. And it's like, I look at them, I'm like, oh my God, I wish I had that kind of mentality, do you know, where I can just like aim high. But a lot of the time, for a lot of competitors, that fear of like not living up to those expectations and feeling like failure. But I think, like you said, like the more you progress in the sport and the more you win, the more your confidence builds and the more you can speak like these top level athletes, you know. So that's I completely relate to that. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think sometimes it just takes time to actually be able to feel that way as well. Like, because sometimes, you know, people can speak all of this stuff, but in terms of actions and actually like feeling it for themselves. Like sometimes it's all talk and not actually them, you know, feeling that, if that makes sense. So they could say like, yes, I want to get my pro card this year, but not actually believe it. Or people tell them like, yeah, you're going to get your pro card this year, and then not feel it. You just have to give yourself time. I think that's the main thing.
Absolutely.
For sure.
And how was it, Phoebe? Like, obviously you did text us a week before. So did that really boost your confidence going into the Olympia? Because I mean, that win, I can only imagine, felt like just a really calming, like, okay, I'm ready. We're going in.
Yeah.
Did that do that?
Yeah, exactly that. And do you know what? I went into that show, I had no, what's the word? There was nothing to lose with that show for me. So I was an Olympian, obviously, or turning an Olympian for 2022, but there was no kind of standard set in terms of like, okay, cool. People thought Daraja was going to beat me, or other Olympians were going to beat me. There's no expectation for me, because they're like, oh, they're Olympians, you know, or Phoebe's like one of the top, or going into one of the top Olympians, you know what I mean? So I think there was no expectation for me. So for me, going into that show, I was like, whatever happens with the show, I can just take feedback for it, see what I need to improve on within that week. It was a huge risk, don't get me wrong, in terms of like confidence wise and mentality, because if I didn't maybe place as well as I wanted to, it might have knocked my confidence going into the Olympia, but it didn't. It was, you know, a great confidence booster. I got exactly what I needed in terms of feedback and stuff like that, and it was great momentum. We needed that momentum because we only had really competed obviously in March for the Arnolds, and it wasn't my best showing, so I wanted to show the judges like, hey, I'm here, like I've improved so much more.
Look
than
what I've been
did.
doing.
Yeah, I've improved so much more since I last stepped on stage, and just like I said, a little bit more momentum to kind of get people talking, like, oh, let's have a look at Phoebe and see what she's doing. Do you know what I mean? And it worked, which was great. And I'm now qualified, it's such a huge weight off my shoulders again. So it's nice to just be qualified. And after the Arnolds, I'll be going into an off-season, and then preparing and getting ready for 2023. So that's perfect timing.
Yeah. And again, that's probably going to feed into your confidence. Do you know, it's not like you're under pressure to try and get a last minute qualification like a lot of athletes are, you know, and then they could be going into that Olympia with a really stressed body, you know, after already being on prep for such a long time. So again, that's going to help your confidence. Incredible. But, I suppose I just want to talk about kind of the barriers that you face along your journey, either as an amateur or as a pro, whether it came with like feedback that you got from judges or self-doubt or anything like that. Because I think when we look at pros online and the top levels, you feel like you're just robots and that like nothing comes in your way, and you have this like very, very thick shell. But the reality is you struggle just like us amateurs do in different things. So what are the kind of like biggest barriers that you faced along your journey? Have you ever, like you said, like you almost like you didn't quit at any stage, but mentally, like what have you kind of dealt with there?
Well, I always try and say to people that the only difference between amateurs and, you know, pros is the title, essentially, in terms of like your mindset. And obviously I know the body, but in terms of the mentality towards it, it should only really be the title, if that makes sense. So trying to differentiate the two, mindset's going to be very similar. Maybe if you're a pro, you might be a little bit more determined in some aspects, but I honestly feel like some amateurs are sometimes even more determined than some pros to get their pro card. So I do feel like there's not a huge barrier in that sense of mentality, because I think all of us can be the same, if that makes sense. But kind of the barriers I face is definitely self-doubts. Like I created this kind of hashtag know your own ability back in when I was getting my pro card, because it was a chance for me to like try and make people see their own ability and see my own ability of what you're capable of. Because if you put your mind to something, you know, you can do anything you want. But I think sometimes you forget how much, like what you can do and how far you can actually go. So for example, like I went to go into my pro, like to get my pro card, obviously got my pro card, but then from my pro card to Olympia or Olympia qualification was a huge gap. So there was so many times where I could have quit, and there was a lot of self-doubt within that journey, but I didn't, because I knew I was meant for this, if that makes sense. And I think sometimes that's hard to see. But I think it's hard to kind of explain it, but it's just a case of like, you just have to know why you're doing this and remember your why. And obviously all those cheesy little things, but it's very true, because if you forget and only think about that end goal of, oh, I'm only doing this for the Olympia. I wasn't only doing it for the Olympia. Obviously there was other reasons to it, but I think sometimes that gets blurred within that. So like, you only see pro card, you only see Olympia, and then you forget why you're even on stage, if that makes sense. So knowing what you are capable of, knowing your why, all that type of thing is very, very important. But no, I think mainly the barriers I face, like I said, is just self-doubt, I think. In terms of judges' feedback, I've never gotten judges' feedback to the point where it's been like very like bad in a sense. It's always been sometimes disheartening, where it's like at the beginning of my journey, they wanted me to have a little less muscle. And then the bit kind of middle, they wanted me to have a little bit more. And now they want me to be a little bit more fuller. So you'll always find that feedback is up and down, but you cannot take it personally. I think a lot of people do sometimes think, oh, the judges don't like me, or they take it personally, or anything like that. But the judges are doing their job. Like they're judging your bodies. That's what they're paid to do, you know? So never take it personally. Like I've never taken anyone's feedback personally or anything like that at all. But I always just try and make sure that I improve and disconnect from that, if that makes sense. And try not allow their feedback to kind of like surround who you are. Like, oh, I have to like, get rid of all my muscle, or, build a load of muscle. Do you know what I mean? That's not only what you are. So yeah, I think those are the main barriers I think I've faced really for my entire journey.
Yeah, it's incredible. I think you've been very good at adapting to what they're looking for. And like you said, like I always thought that you were like the more muscular kind of bikini girl. And then it was so interesting when we were doing the review of the Olympia, it was like, no, actually Phoebe could do with more muscle, do you know, the kind of way. And I think when you see like the lineup, and it was like you were one of the taller girls, so you comparing to kind of like the smaller girls, it does look like what Adam always says, it does look like you have way less muscle. So it's crazy how like a few years ago it was like, no, you need to tone it down. So I remember thinking like you were quite big in the upper body, like you had really, really defined shoulders, and then you see at the Olympia, it's like, oh no, you need to build more, you need to be fuller. It's crazy.
Which is crazy, because sometimes it's so hard to kind of nail that, especially with the height differences. So obviously most of my feedback has been just to come in a little bit fuller, keep the same conditioning, but come in a little bit fuller, in specifically my upper body, which is so interesting, because I've always been told, less upper body, or not always been told, but a lot of the times it's like less upper body, to kind of match your lower, or my lower body wasn't small, but like my upper body was significantly bigger. So sometimes I'd be told less shoulders, more more lower body. So sometimes it flip-flops, but I think trying to adapt, like you said, adapting to that feedback is very important, because if you're just bringing the same package every single time, it's just, they're just going to obviously say like, this is what you need, you still need to work on this, you still need to work on that, like it's not changing, and they see that. So you have, when you make those changes and they recognize it, it really does make a huge difference. So but no, I'm happy with the feedback that I got, because that means I can lift a little bit heavier and fill out a little bit more and all that sort of thing, because we thought I was going to be one of the, more muscular ones, especially being next to people like Laura Lee. And even Jen, like she was so bubbly when she's always been very bubbly anyway, but being actually next to her, or not next to her physically, but like compared to her, it was very much like, okay, cool, I could actually fill out a little bit more. Same with Maureen and everyone. So it was interesting to see that, because I've never been stood next to Jen before. I've competed with Laura Lee a few times, and we were kind of comparable in terms of muscle mass. But no, I can definitely fill out a little bit more this time around, so I'm excited for that.
I suppose, no, go ahead, Grace.
No, you got your turn to speak.
No, it's just exciting. No, it is. It's just exciting, and I think we've spoken about it on the podcast previously anyway. And I think it was part of the Olympia review. It's so difficult, isn't it? And I suppose, Phoebe, you've got the most experience in this. No matter where you go, the lineup's always going to change. So long as you're sort of within yourself and concentrating on your package and how that's developing, in terms of sort of mindset and the resilience, I can only imagine your resilience has really built over time, over that time frame between being pro to now. to not take that sort of context from the lineup itself, because you have no control over that, but ultimately turning up better yourself? Like, do you feel like you are more resilient to take that feedback now as opposed to when you were sort of turning pro or even in the amateur ranks? Do you think that develops over time?
Yeah, I definitely feel like it develops over time, because I think sometimes people will, like, you could bring your absolute best and it not be what they're looking for. And that sucks, because you've worked so hard to get to that point. And I mean, everyone's worked so hard to obviously get to that point. And when they say you need more this, you need more that, sometimes it can be very hard to hit in that moment. But you have to just know that, like we said before, it's nothing personal. That's exactly what their job is to do, is to judge you and to give you feedback on what you need to improve on. And it's always going to change when you're next to other people. So like the lineup will always change when you're in, and well, the lineup will always change, pro and amateur. Like it will, and I think amateur is probably harder, because you sometimes don't know who's going to show up at all, unless people obviously say they're doing it. But in terms of height classes, sometimes you don't know who you're going to be next to either. So I mean, sometimes with pro it's sometimes a little bit easier. So if the list comes out, you can kind of gauge who you'll be standing next to and stuff like that, but it still doesn't make a difference, because you still be standing next to them, if that makes sense. You can just prepare a little bit more. Yeah. But it does become a little bit difficult when it does consistently change, but also it's kind of motivating, because you can be standing next to the best and be like, okay, this is what I need to work on, and this is the best of the best, so this feedback is going to be very valuable for me, you know. So I feel like that sometimes is more motivating than anything, being stood next to the best and saying, okay, this is what you need to work on, you know. So
I think a massive,
I definitely have that.
Yeah, I think a massive part of your success as well, Phoebe, is obviously like Adam, and just speaking about like show to show, like he just knows bikini. We talk about him all the time. Like I'm obsessed with his podcast and his reviews. Like I didn't realize how much he actually knew, and I'm sitting here with my boyfriend Ross, and he's in shock. He's like, oh my god, I never even realized that about looking at different bikini physiques. Like, so I think he's had obviously such a positive influence on you and your journey. Like he just knows so much about bikini, because obviously just so experienced, you know. How would you, I suppose, I can't remember, I don't know how long you've been with Adam actually.
Since 2019, February time. So we started my first prep in February 2019. So almost 4 years. Almost 4 years, which is a long time. Long time.
He's brought you so far though. But like, how would you compare, I suppose? Because there is, we talk about it all the time, there is a difference between the US and the UK approach. And we were talking, I suppose, just like show to show, and sometimes what they look for in European shows is so different to what they look for in US. And amateur to pro, we spoke about this with Phoebe Goodman, like amateur to pro is so different. But how would you compare, I suppose, obviously the coaching and I suppose what they look for? And you've competed on both sides of the world, so how would you compare the two?
So in terms of coaching methods, I feel like the US is just a little bit more experienced than, in terms of the bikini, to the UK, Europe, and all that type of thing, which I've said this before. And I know sometimes obviously people are like, well, we've been going since 2018 and we've had it for a while now, but 2018, I don't even know when the US started like competing for bikini. I want to say it was like
2012.
I was just about to say 2012 or 2010 or something, but like they've had so much longer than us, and they're so much bigger than the UK, if that makes sense. So I feel like there's been so much more experience to within that category to what they've had in the UK. And I think that's the main difference, that they've had more experience, they've had more time with the actual category, whereas we've only literally had NPC since 2018. So we just need more time. And I think it's definitely building now, like so much more. But I just think there just needs to be a little bit more knowledge with coaching and stuff like that as well, with different methods of how because I know a lot of coaches kind of like are still trying to find the different ways to kind of like, for example, peak bikini and how to train bikini and all that type of thing. So there's different ways of doing it. I think the US, not saying that the US knows more, because they don't know more about training and stuff like that, because I do feel like the training differences in the UK is wider, if I'm honest. I feel like the training in the UK is a lot more like experience than the US, if that makes sense. So the US is a lot less training based versus the UK is. So that's something that I found even 2019, like when I was with, because I was with Rob from Team LRF and then I went to Adam, the training was a lot different, but it was a lot more specific to what I needed to build versus just doing everything, if that makes sense. I feel like a lot of the coaches in the UK know how to build you, if that makes sense, but they need to then know how to fine tune. So like specifics for like, so like defining like glute training and defining, you know, upper body instead of doing everything. But again, that's something I can see the development is happening over time now. Like it's definitely changed from 2019 to what it is now. Because I know, for example, with Team LRF, when I was with Team LRF to versus Team Elite, we took out so much compound training because I didn't need to train, like do like a lot of deadlifts or a lot of back training because I already had a developed back. It was like a very light training in specific areas to keep it there, to maintain it. But to build is obviously very different. So it's just a case of knowing what needs to be done for your physique and then kind of going from there. I think the diet's pretty much the same. I do feel like there's a lot more macro tracking in the UK than the US, for example, though, in terms of like dieting, but I don't think that's an issue because I know Daraja macro tracks and I know a few other pros that macro track as well. So I don't think diet's really different. I think it's maybe how people get peaked, how people kind of diet into things maybe. That's the only difference that I've seen really. But I do feel like it's just a case of catching up and like fine tuning is the main thing for the UK, but that's honestly it. Because I feel like there's been a lot of new UK pros that have come out of the wings, like a lot. And a lot of like different coaches have like, you know, created pros over the time. So I feel like it's exciting to see British bodybuilding for bikini, especially like come to life more.
Yeah,
100%. Do you see like a difference as well in terms of judging, Phoebe? So like I thought we've spoken about it, myself and Grace, like just in our own personal opinions, especially European tend to have a much denser, sort of leaner, harder look. And the UK, there can be disparity, obviously, depending on the shows. It can change a little bit. Sometimes it's favored, sometimes it's not. And I think we're very much still bedding down with that. But has there been much movement in the US in terms of judging? Do you see a large difference in terms of what they're looking for?
The difficult thing is that I don't think it's down to the judging. I think it's to what's in front of them. So I see in the European lineup, they're still very, very different to what the lineups are like in the US, for example. So I think that a good example I think I saw was Portugal. There was a girl that came over from the US. I think it was Leona, I want to say, potentially. She just placed at the New York Pro and Pittsburgh Pro 4th. And then she came to do the Portugal Pro in July, I think, and she got 8th place. And she was told that she was told she wasn't lean enough, but she obviously just, you know, I think the Pittsburgh Pro and the New York Pro were very competitive because there was Laura Lee, Ashley, you know, those types of high level physiques, and she got 4th with them, versus when she came to Portugal, she was told she needs to be leaner. So I don't think it's the judging. I do think it is
who's in front
of them. Is
the
in
athletes.
front of them. Yeah. And I do think that the European side of things does sometimes bring a slightly leaner physique, but then also equally, I have been seeing a lot of like when people get their pro cuts and stuff, they're not that lean in terms of the leaner standard that they're looking for in the pro league on the European side, if that makes sense. So it's very hard to kind of pinpoint it because getting the pro card, they might pick a slightly softer physique versus when they're in the pro league, they might go for a slightly leaner physique because of the different standard, if that makes sense. So it does become very difficult to then judge that. And that's what, because I've spoken to a few judges before, and they've said the exact same in terms of who it's in front of, or who's in front of them, sorry. So, but I don't think it's the judging, because there's a lot of judges that do come over from the American side now to the European shows to judge. But I think it's just a case of who's in front of them, which is difficult to kind of judge if there's a very, very different physiques in US versus Europeans, you know? So I think it's just Europeans just need to catch up.
I agree. I think Adam touched on it at one stage.
That's what can throw amateurs, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sorry, Jade.
Okay.
I think there could be a little bit of a delay.
I think so, ever so slightly.
Ever so slightly. No, just because I think a lot of it comes down to the standard, like you said, in those European shows. Like a few years ago, there was I can't remember the other federation, but they look for a way heavier muscled bikini girl. I can't remember the name. I think it was Elite Pro.
IFBB Elite.
Yeah, IFBB Elite.
Yeah.
So I think Alison Testu as well came from there. And I remember when she started, I was
she
like,
did.
oh my God, the muscle compared to America is huge. So I think, yeah, like it is just who in front of them. A lot of people just kind of give out about what they're looking for, but they just have to judge what's in front of them on the day. Do you know?
And it's difficult to, you know, it's difficult when the judging is sometimes like a little bit different, and obviously it's hard not to kind of say, oh, it was down to the judging, but sometimes it generally, like you said, it is in like what's in front of you. Also, what I've really realized is sometimes the winner that it doesn't look like it's, well, not doesn't look, but the winner isn't always someone that you think at the time. You have to keep moving them. And I think one thing that I've seen massively in the European scene, that, and even in the UK scene when there was UK pro shows as well, was that the judges were judging like a lot. Like there was round after round after round, and posing the pros. I mean, even the amateurs a little bit as well. And they were going through it a lot to try and find that winner and to see who you know brought out their best. So I do definitely feel like the judging, they work the girls a lot. So sometimes it's not who you think at the time, and then you look and you're like, okay, cool, they're actually the ones that are performing the best, they're the ones that are holding things the best. So I do feel like that does take into account as well.
Absolutely. Jay,
So,
do you want to ask a question? Is there still a delay? I think there's still a delay.
Sorry.
I'm
with you.
You're with me. It's like you're almost over in Dubai or something, to the lag.
Perhaps I would do.
No, you're all good. I suppose I want to talk, this is something I'm always chatting about to Ross, and even when I'm looking at other like podcasts, is the difference in off seasons. And I feel like this is one thing that I've been so eager to chat to you about, Phoebe, is the difference in the two off seasons. Because to me, your off season is how I want to take my off season, is have that more balanced approach. But in the US, it's kind of like, no, like, you know, stay very, very close to stage weight, can't really have that kind of balance. But you've always stood out to me as somebody that kind of, I suppose, just kind of breaks that like stereotype, that US stereotype, you know. So talk to me a little bit about that, if you're happy enough to kind of go in.
Of course.
Because I know obviously like Adam coaches you and stuff, and like his approach is very, very different to sometimes what I would do and other pros in the UK would do. Yeah.
So I feel like Adam's always been very much like, he wants me to stay a little bit closer to stage weight, because sometimes bringing it down obviously is hard. And I think it's just the same with anyone, if I'm honest. But what we both really found is that like giving myself time to just take time away from stage does make a huge difference within my prep. So this time round, in terms of like going into an off season after the Arnolds, we're very much gonna, you know, relax, reverse, not, you know, go too heavy or anything like that, but we want to try and make sure that I fully recover mentally, physically before going back into a prep. And that's something that has always worked for me very well. As long as I give myself enough time for a prep and I'm mentally ready for going into a prep, it's always been successful. So that's something that I always try and preach, because that works for me. I know it doesn't always work for everyone else in terms of off season and stuff like that. Some people like to stay close to their stage weight, which is absolutely fine, because they want a slightly easier prep, and it to be easy to kind of pick shows and stuff. I do feel like the reason people in the US, for example, stay a little bit closer to stage weight is because there's so many more shows to work towards. So like there's a lot more shows in the US to kind of like cut down into at 8 weeks out, maybe, or 10 weeks out, or even less than that sometimes. Like I'll see pros obviously hovering around that kind of level, and then be like, okay, cool, I'm prepping 5 weeks out. So I do feel like they have more opportunity to be able to just prep straight away and just be like, cool, I'm just going to pick the show and let's go. Versus, I mean, now that I've kind of advanced a little bit more, I can, you know, I don't need to pick shows that are really, really close, or I can pick shows that are like a little bit further away from where I need to start from, if that makes sense. So I don't need to compete as often. But I do prefer an approach where I can be a little bit more relaxed, because I need my time to recover, recoup, and then go into a prep after, because it does take a huge toll on your mental state and your physical state. So I think it's very important for people to be able to get themselves ready before they go into a prep.
Yeah, absolutely. I think everybody's off seasons are different, and it's relative to how much muscle you want to build, how balanced you want to be, if there's any like life events. And like any responsibilities that you have, essentially, you know, that kind of way, and how much time that you give yourself between shows. But I think a lot of it comes down to, okay, can you make the improvements? Are you recovered enough? And getting your health back, and because ultimately that is the kind of priority. But doesn't mean you have to go way above your stage weight, but enough to kind of make sure that your health is in a good spot. I think I definitely think there's a happy medium.
I think how much did I go up this off season? I think I went up about 25 pounds, which is a lot for some people. I'm quite tall and I hold quite a lot of muscle anyway. So 25 pounds for me isn't a huge amount, or I don't feel like it's a huge amount on me at the time, if that makes sense. And I know other people, for example, Laura Lee is another one. She goes up around 20-ish pounds. Some people that are slightly smaller might go up only 10 pounds or go up 15. So I think everyone's is different. And I think a lot of people think the pros don't put on that much. But I think one of the reasons some of the pros don't put on that much is because they don't want to gain that much. And also they didn't need to. So I actually really don't need to gain 25 pounds to bring it all down in terms of to build muscle. But I personally like how I feel when I am a little bit heavier, because I feel sexier, I feel more womanly, I feel like I have more energy, I have more, like, it just, everything feels a little bit better. So I prefer to be a little bit heavier or a bit more above my stage weight than most people, because I feel good. I feel a lot more like intact with everything else. Versus some people like to stay slightly lighter, and they also don't need to build that much, so they don't want to, you know, put on that much weight, and they don't need to actually build that much muscle, so they want to try and stay around that level, so they don't, you know, go too far away from the shape that they need to bring. So I think that's the main difference you'll find with the pros, is that sometimes they don't need to build, or sometimes they don't want to put on that much, versus some amateurs will need to build that much. And I find a lot of the times, a lot of amateurs will get way more uncomfortable in their shape in an off season to push for that muscle mass, if that makes sense, versus pros. Some pros obviously do, but you see it more in amateurs.
And I think it's more visible, isn't it? I think, as like coming from an amateur sort of level versus the pro, obviously your pro physique is already pretty much there. Like, you're refining, you're making sure that you're bringing up like areas really specifically, you're making that muscle, you're really bedding it in, as opposed to when you're sort of working your way up the ranks, that's new muscle, and it's not going to come in as defined. It's not going to sit on you until it's like sort of settled on your frame and things like that. And I know from a personal level, I know I've pushed my body to places where I just can't look in the mirror, like, hand on heart, like, complete honesty.
I have as well,
and it's difficult tough. So to sort of gauge, like, it, from a listener's standpoint, if you are an amateur, just to gauge your expectations and your sort of where you put that benchmark, I suppose it's really important to be looking at the pros, be looking at them for inspiration as well, but then equally keep your context where your body is. Because
I do feel like people will kind of, you know, try and stay, or like the main question that I always get is like, how much do you weigh, whether I'm in an off season or a prep. And I think people sometimes are interested, that they're also wanting to kind of say, okay, Phoebe is at this weight, so I'm okay to be at this weight, if that makes sense, which shouldn't be the case for anyone, like any pros or amateurs or anything like that. So I think it's good to always be interested and kind of, you know, it doesn't have to be compared in terms of like comparing people's journeys, but always just be eager and, or like I said, interested, but never try and duplicate what they're trying to do.
Absolutely. I think it's really stressful, and there's all of this online, this information. I remember I read one thing, it was like, you need to stay within like 6 kilos of your stage weight, and then when I went, that's like one of my legs. I went above, exactly. But it is like how tall you are affects that, you know. Like, I'm 5'7", so it's like, oh my God, like I gained 6 kilos quite easily, you know. I would sit around 10 to 12 kilos above my stage weight as well, but I'm like, oh my God, other people are staying within 6, but it's all relative and it's context dependent and how much you need to build and all that kind of thing. So if you're listening, like, don't stress yourself out, you know, if you're not, like, I commend Ashley. I think she's amazing. Hopefully we'll get her on the podcast. But for me, you know, I couldn't do that because I'm so much older and I have to build so much more. So everybody is different, you know.
And also just listen to your coach and what they're actually advising you to do. So like, if your coach wants you to push to that level of like, right, let's get uncomfortable, let's build some muscle, then do that, and you'll have probably a long off season where you're in it for maybe a year, 2 years, and then you'll come down and give yourself enough time to bring it down. But if your coach doesn't want you to put on that much, or you don't need to, then you don't need to. So it's always a case of just listening to that one person, or not the one person, kind of judges feedback dependent as well, but that person that's guiding you within your journey and stuff.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So Phoebe, like in terms of like business as well, so we're talking just on your, obviously your professional and your athlete sort of success and things like that over the last 6 years, but talk to us about business, talk to us about YouTube, clothing. I've seen you bringing out a few ranges. So how's that all going, and how do you manage that alongside your competitive sort of career as well? Does it slot in well? Is it stressful sometimes?
So I love that you obviously like ask this as well, because I think a lot of people think like I just compete. I think there's sometimes I get questions of like, what do you do? And I'm like, do you just compete as like your job? And I was like, competing pays no bills. So I cannot definitely just be competing. Like, obviously I know some people that will get paid to compete, and, you know, people get prize money, but it's a very, very small margin of their income. So I am the owner, CEO of the Posing Portal, which is a platform that I've built up since 2021. And it's a way to learn and improve your posing through assessments, through tutorials, through booking systems on the website and stuff like that. And that's my main kind of business. And that's grown a lot. It's been amazing, if I'm honest. Like, I've really grown a lot since March time in 2021. So it's been crazy because there's been so many members coming in and out, and it's cool because both of you have been part of it at some point in your journeys as well, which is cool. But we've obviously got, at the moment, got 2 coaches on there. So we've got Beatrice, which is she is a Bikini Pro. She's been to the Olympia twice, gone to the Arnolds. You know, she's amazing. She's great at what she does, and she's only like 22, which is crazy. And then we've got Marissa Andrews, which is our wellness coach, and she's just kind of come on recently, the back end of last year. And she's been great as well. Like, she's taken on a lot of wellness athletes, and it's cool to see how they both work, because they're both very different as well. So it's really, really cool to see that. And then hopefully we'll be getting on some more coaches and stuff. So like, it's really cool to be able to grow it. Yes, it is very stressful when you're in a prep and you're like trying to manage all these things and trying to manage people. But I have some great people like work for me and like stuff like that. So it makes it a lot easier when I have like massive prep brain and stuff like that. But no, things have been great. I've really enjoyed like building up the business and stuff, especially whilst competing, because it does definitely help. It helps me get a lot more context out there in terms of like getting clients when I'm over in the US, when I'm over in the UK, all that type of thing. So it does help a lot when I'm competing. And then the clothing brand, we only just brought out, I think, in December time. That was kind of like a release I randomly, because I wanted to obviously bring on some clothing before the Olympia and stuff. And we sold out, which was great. So I was really happy with that. So we're going to release some more, I think, before Arnolds. But that was kind of just a merch thing that I wanted to see how it did, like if people were interested. And I really like the saying that obviously, you know, we brought up with, and like, you know, not given, redemption, and like knowing your ability and all those types of things. And I just want people to be able to wear something and feel that, if that makes sense. I know that sounds very cheesy, but I just love being able to kind of like have that out in the world. And then what else? Well, I can't remember what else was the other.
Well, YouTube, you're absolutely smashed YouTube. Yes.
YouTube, that's a lot. It's a lot. So honestly, I don't do it all myself. It's like I have an editor, you know, I have a lot of people that are behind me, like keeping all these businesses up and stuff like that as well. So it's not just me that I kind of like holding these up, because I know a lot of people are like, how do you do all of this? I spoke to Jasmine from Compacts like regularly, and she was like, how do you do everything, like YouTube, however many businesses you have and everything in between? And I'm like, I have a lot of people that help me with this, because I can't do it myself. But you know, I've always loved YouTube, and I've always loved being able to share my journey. So that's something that I've always been like very like prominent on. Like, I have to get a video out, I have to kind of like update people, because I do like the journey that I like I've been showing in terms of like the transparency of things, because I feel like sometimes I do it in a different way where I just chat to the camera, and it makes people feel very like open when they're watching my videos, versus it being like a workout video or a full day of eating or something like that. So I do feel like I connect with my audience in a different way, which I really do. I love, if I'm honest. So, but yeah, I think a lot of the business things, it comes down to time management, definitely just trying to manage my time, like 100%. Like if I need to make sure that I know what I'm doing throughout the weeks, months, everything, where I am in the world as well, because I'm obviously flying here, there, and everywhere. And yeah, those are the main things, if I'm honest. But no, I've loved being able to, you know, not just be an athlete and just compete. I've loved being able to bring so much more than that, if that makes sense, and show everything in between.
I was literally just going to touch on that. And then when you mentioned Jasmine, it was like that saying of not just a bikini girl. And I think it's so important that you have something, even though obviously posing is a massive part of it, but you know, you're a businesswoman more than anything, do you know, that kind of way. And I think the fact that you can juggle being a businesswoman with a prep, like, just arguably one of the hardest things anybody can ever go through, do you know, it's incredible that you're able to manage both, and you have that support network as well to help you. And obviously Max doing a lot of your editing, like, you're just like a dream team. You fit so perfectly together. And him obviously filmed you over in Vegas. It was just so nice. And obviously you're in Dubai now, and you probably have such an amazing support network over there as well, because it's just like fitness central.
And do you know what, I've really enjoyed like our journeys that we've had, like as a couple of like being Max together. Like we've gone from, you know, the UK to Dubai to Vegas to wherever. We've both been supporting each other. Like I say allowed me, and a lot of people are like, why do you say allowed? And I'm like, because the decisions we make are a team. It's not just a case of I make the decisions and then I'm like, yeah, I'm going to Vegas for 3 months. Bye. He allowed me and, you know, supported me going to Vegas for 2.5 months. Like, not many people, I've asked, and not many people at all would allow their other half to do that. Like, not allow, but they wouldn't want their other half to kind of go for that long and even trust them, if I'm honest. But he knew that I wanted this dream, this goal for a lot longer than we've both been, like, you know, together. So I feel like he understood what I needed to do, and he was happy to support that. And I think that's a huge thing that needs to kind of be, I don't know, seen more in the fitness industry for sure, like in terms of supporting. And I think there's so many people that, acknowledge. I think a lot of people have that support system. It's just a case of like showing it sometimes. But no, I'm happy with the journey that we've had, obviously from here, there, and everywhere. So it's been great.
Yeah, no, you've been so supportive. I know you said like you took a big risk going to the States, but didn't he leave as well, like his job as well to go do filming? I remember I saw that. I was like, oh my God, like you guys are so cool. Like you're doing everything like for each other. Do you know that kind of way?
Yeah.
Like I think so. When he was actually a window fitter, when we came over to Dubai in 2020, the end of 2020, he was a window fitter. I was obviously wanting to start the posing portal, and we were kind of at that in between of, do I set up business here, but what can Max do, because he's not got anything as of yet. So we were looking for jobs for him, and then one kind of came into hand, and he kind of just took it straight away and was like, right, let's roll with it. And then it was like, okay, cool, you need to go back, quit your job, come back, and then we can just set up shop here. And that's literally what happened. So it honestly was amazing. Very, very stressful, but it was amazing that we trusted each other in that moment to be like, no, this is what we've got to do, you know, moving forwards to grow.
And that's life, isn't it, Phoebe, at the end of the day? Like, I think that's what's really nice and what sets you aside from, in my view, like from other athletes that I've followed, perhaps, like there isn't a filter where you stop at sort of business and success and competing. There is almost like a clear like window where you allow people into that part of your life. And I think from a sort of relatability standpoint, like as an athlete sort of trying to establish yourself and become pro and things like that, you have to juggle all of those things. Those things don't stop. You can't just quit work, or when you're hungry, just be like, no, I'm going to stay in bed today. I'm too tired, or do my cardio and go back to bed. So seeing you manage those things at the level that you are at now and progressing through has been something that I personally, and I'm sure loads of other people, have been able to really connect with. It's amazing.
Life doesn't stop. Life doesn't stop when you prep. I think even when you're amateur or pro, like it doesn't stop. So you have to just literally keep going. And like, everyone is, it distracts you in a way, because like you're just you're being busy. Prep sometimes just becomes normal to you. You're just like, okay, cool, let's just take my meals with me. Let's go here, like, and do what I need to do. Like, okay, I need to find somewhere to train. Like, it just becomes part of your life instead of it being almost like a chore, if that makes sense. It becomes part of your life instead of it being like just a chore. So I do feel like it can be hard to juggle everything, but like, because I've been doing this for so long, and I think a lot of people will relate, is like it just becomes within your routine. You're like, okay, cool. If I'm going to this place, I need to find cardio, I need to find a gym, I need to go here for this and that type of thing. And we all goes through that. But I think it's important to show that life doesn't stop, because it doesn't. And like, even in an off season, for example, like you can still have that balance of going out, having a few drinks, just having a normal life, and it not stop your progress. Because I think a lot of people sometimes think, if I go out, this is going to stop my progress. It's not. One night a week, maybe it won't. If you do it every day, it's going to, but not many people are going to do that. So it's like showing my life outside of bodybuilding. It's like one thing that I always try and do as much as I can, because that's something that's super, super important to me as well.
Yeah. I think that's what's amazing about you, is the relatability factor as well, and how you're able to kind of show that through YouTube. And I think that's why you're like just a favorite in the UK. It's just like everybody just loves you, loves your journey, and can relate to you. And I think it's really important as well as a pro that you can show that too, do you know, because you're what's the word, like you're a mascot of the sport, you know, and we look up to you and we want to be able to know that you're human too at the end of the day. You go through exactly what we go through, and you do what we go through, and it makes us feel like more human, do you know, that we don't have to be this like robotic and shut down our life and shut off things and shut off relationships. I know, like you are an inspiration to a lot of people, so it's amazing. But come here, talk to us about, before we kind of wrap up and go into our Q&A, tell us about kind of your improvements. You said that you're kind of looking to fill out, and obviously you're 7 weeks out from the Arnolds. One, what are your expectations for obviously the Arnolds, and two, what is your kind of, I suppose, off season into prep look like then into the Olympia?
So I think at the moment, so obviously being we're just under 7 weeks, we have really tried to kind of fill out my frame a little bit more. So like, instead of, because we dieted since July time for the Olympia, so it's a long time. So we were already very dieted into going into the Olympia, which I think it was a great thing, but I was already ready at like probably 18 weeks in. So we were kind of holding and maintaining that condition for a long time. So we kind of wanted to make sure that right now we'd kind of maintain that fullness as much as we can. So we kind of made sure that training was really, really spot on in terms of like heavy lifting, had food for energy, all that type of thing. And we're at a point now where we're like, okay, cool, we're happy to kind of like dig a little bit deeper now. So we don't sacrifice like too much fullness. So at the moment we're on point, but I personally feel like it feels different, because obviously I'm not over in Vegas and my condition isn't kind of the same, because I'm on, I'm on the point of where we need to be, but I'm not ahead. So it feels weird for me where I'm like, I feel behind. But I know I'm not, so I just have to listen to Adam on that one. But Adam. No, so we're in exactly. So we're in a good place where we're at now. We just need to bring similar to kind of condition what we brought to the Olympia, and then obviously just a little bit more fullness in upper body mainly. I actually got my feedback back from Tyler yesterday, and he said about just a little bit more fullness in my legs and glutes in terms of for my front pose and my back pose. So those are the main things that we're kind of focusing on. And then Sandy said the same with upper body. So she said a little bit more fullness in upper body, and then even Attila, I think backstage, she told me just a little bit more fullness kind of everywhere. So that's what we're really trying to bring. We're really trying to make sure that we show off that nice bubbly shape that they're obviously wanting. And then from there, I think we're probably just going to transition, because I think, so for example, I think it's March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, November. It's 8 months. So a long time. So I think what we'll probably do is again start at around, let's say, August time, trying to probably clean things up and like plan things, but we're at least going to have a very good amount of time off stage and away from being in a stage lean physique, because we really need to, if I'm honest, because we've been in it for a while now. So we want to try and make sure that we focus on that as well. If I'm honest, we're just focusing on the Arnolds at the moment, and then after we'll kind of discuss what we'll do moving forwards, because if I'm honest, we might do a show before to qualify for 2024. We don't know yet. So and to be fair, that's kind of the trend of what we've been doing the last 2 years. So we might just keep doing that. So we just qualify early. It's just easier. So I think that's what we're probably going to work towards, but we're not going to do a show before we won't do a show like in between the Olympia, I don't think.
I get you.
Essentially. So that's probably what we'll end up doing.
do like another secret kind of show and
we'll
tell us all
what happens. Yeah, just see what happens. Just see what
that'd
happens.
be incredible.
Yeah, we'll just see. I think the Olympia this year is in November, beginning of November, in Florida. So it is slightly different to obviously being in Vegas, but I think we'll do the same kind of thing where I'll probably come out maybe 10 weeks out to Vegas, stay there, and then obviously we'll go over to Florida whenever we need to, and then kind of go from there. And that's literally, that will probably be the game plan.
Incredible.
So I'm excited.
Amazing.
Brilliant. Do you want to touch on anything, Jay, before we go into? We just got a couple of questions if you have the time, Phoebe, to go through a couple of things you kind of answered already. But somebody asked, how do you handle social events when you're on prep? And I actually did see, I think you put up something yesterday. I think you went out. I was like, oh my God, how do you go out? Because I'm like a hermit. Like, I find it so hard, especially if I was like 7 weeks out. So how do you do that? And obviously socialize a massive part of your life and something you value. So how do you manage it?
Well, if I'm honest, there was actually one time I think before I was trying to think mentally, getting myself ready for like the Olympia meet and greet and the Arnolds meet and greet, because you're obviously a few days out. And I was like, oh my God, I feel like I don't know how I'm going to do it, because I feel like I don't want to project the Phoebe that's not Phoebe, if that makes sense. So I was like, I have to feel like I have to get ready for it. But if I'm honest, I feel like if you kind of, again, it's a time management thing, and it's kind of like a thing where you kind of like plan. So I already knew that this kind of event, like the other day that was coming up, was going to happen like a few weeks ago. So I was like, okay, cool. I don't really need, I'm going to try and maintain like, you know, energy or anything like that for this specific event. I personally right now haven't got like too much bad energy, so it's not been too bad, but closer to show, obviously, you know, dips in and out and all that type of thing, so there'll be a lot less social events that are like out or anything like that. But no, I really do try and make sure that I make time for my friends and my family, to make sure that, because I think the closer I get within a prep, I then, like you said before, start to shut off and I go into like hermit mode at around probably like 5 weeks out or so. So I try and at least before try and like get a few social events in and try and see people and say like, hi, I'm here. How are you? Catch up with people before going into that kind of phase. But no, I think it's just a case of like planning, timing, and just making sure that you're like, you don't have to be there, but you know that you want to be there almost, if that makes sense. Because like, these people support you and what you do, and you won't probably see them for like a matter of weeks and weeks and weeks. So like one event isn't going to do much, you know, and it doesn't have to be out. You can go for coffee or do something like that, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Maybe go for a nap. I know I was having to go for
literally. You
just like mentally prepare.
Go for a coffee, go for a nap, or nap before. That's all you need to do.
I know I need to do that from about 12 weeks out. Like, I'm honestly terrible for it. So God, no, fair play to you for going out. But Jay, do you want to ask the next question?
No, I think I'm just laughing because I think I watched one of your videos, Phoebe, once. It was like back maybe 2019 time, and you literally commented on YouTube, you'd had your pre-workout, then had a nap.
Yeah,
and then
I do it all the
time.
I do it all the time, where I have a coffee and I'm having my coffee now and I'm going to go do cardio after this. But like, I'm like trying to stop myself from having a nap right now, because I'm tired, like, you know, energy goes down, but you just have to force yourself sometimes to have a little bit of a break and a nap and then just go for it, you know? So yeah, it's fine.
I always feel, I remember I went to a concert at about 12 weeks out and I was just up dancing. I felt genuinely hungover the next day. I was like, that's it. I'm not going out. I'm not moving. I'm staying and doing my cardio, gym, and then I'm not going out.
That's the hardest thing, is like when you're going out like in the evening as well. It's like the next day you're like, I actually feel like so much more tired than what I usually would. And it's just like, it's frustrating. But that's one thing I think a lot of people think, they're like, you want to try and make sure that you're maintaining yourself and not like it, not phasing like any more training or too much. Not phasing training or anything like that too much. But no, I cut all of that stuff off probably about 6 weeks anyway. So you're all good.
Cool.
Preservation.
Exactly.
So one of the other questions, Phoebe, it's a little bit so one that we've got rather. They've asked whether if you could pick one great thing and one not so great thing about bodybuilding, what would they be?
I think so many people have asked me this and I'm like, I actually don't know. I feel like the answer changes every time. Okay, so one great thing is I think the community is like so great. It's built up so much, and the support network you get from bodybuilding is like no other, I feel like, personally. I know a lot of people kind of disagree in terms of like they feel like it's a lonely sport, but I honestly disagree with that. I don't think it's a very lonely sport at all. Like, you have people that have the exact same passion for what you're doing as you. So I don't see why it's a lonely sport. I can understand like you sometimes feel alone because you need to shut off and all that type of thing, but I do feel like the community can be very much like, you know, very supportive. So I love the community more than anything, because it's such a great thing, because you could chat to someone about this prep thing that you've been having and people literally understand exactly what you're like talking about. I think the one it can kind of like flip-flop though, in terms of like the opposite thing, is probably like that you can be you have to be very alone at some points in terms of shutting off from social events, and, you know, having to say no to things and not do as much because you can't, like, sometimes you just physically can't, mentally can't. And that's one thing I sometimes it is tough, because I don't like to say no. I like to just say yes to everything. So it is hard to say no to, you know, going out or social events, or not even that, just that, but like being present with your other half and other things like that. I think I don't like that side of things, because, for example, being away from Max for like 3 months, it's tough. Like, obviously I know I've chosen that to do that, but it still doesn't make it easier. So I think that's the one thing with bodybuilding, is like, it's hard to not sometimes always be present, be fully there.
Yeah, I think a lot of us can relate to that as well. I know I'm terrible on prep. I'm like a fucking zombie, and my poor dog then suffers with it because I'm so irritable. But I'm terrible. Not a great person to be on, but I'm learning. I'm getting better at it. Somebody asked, we kind of touched on it before, but how do you keep yourself so motivated? I say motivated because it is kind of motivation. It's more discipline. We always talk about that. But how do you kind of keep yourself motivated for such a long time? And I suppose even what this person said, like, it's not even just your prep, like it's in between as well, because you have such a short little off season, then you've got another short little off season. So how do you kind of keep yourself going through it all and not wanting to take like years off, you know?
Years off, yeah. Because I feel like if I'm honest, it feels like my norm. So I feel like I just like, okay, cool, when's the next show? Or when is the next off season? So it feels like part of my life anyway. So it doesn't feel like I have to be motivated for these specific things, if that makes sense. If I'm honest, a lot of the shows keep me motivated in terms of like my feedback and like coming out of shows and having that game plan to improve and be better than before. That's something that definitely is a huge amount of motivation for me. But those are the main things. I think mainly having a game plan helps me keep motivated. So obviously, if it's an off season, whether it's like doing a show next year or when the next show is, having some sort of plan really helps me stay motivated and keeps the dedication like there, if that makes sense. So definitely trying to give yourself a little bit of a game plan, either like for a year or a few months at least, keeps me going. So yeah, I definitely would say that helps a lot.
Absolutely. Timelines are so important. Even for us amateurs to kind of, even if it's like 2 years down the line, like you're constantly thinking of that goal, and everything that you're doing each day is in relation to that goal, no matter how far away it is, you know, that kind of way. So yeah, absolutely.
100%. Yeah, that's something that I think is very important to do, because like it makes a huge difference. Because if you go into there sometimes not knowing what to do, essentially, you're just going to be like, what am I working towards? And I feel like bodybuilders, it's always good to have a goal. And I feel like I don't think it's a bad thing to have such a large goal, or like to have goals all the time. I think a lot of people sometimes are like, you should just go in there and do it because you love it. And you should, but also having that goal gives you that why sometimes, and it helps you push just that little bit harder. So I do feel like that's important to kind of like identify sometimes as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
I really struggle not having that direction personally. Like, I think that intent comes with the direction, right? So as long as you know why you're going there or where you're heading, there is intent in everything you do. Otherwise, I mean, personally, I'd be going in, wandering around, wondering what the hell to do. So yeah, completely agree with that.
No, I agree with that as well.
So the last one, I'm just going to condense it a little bit because it's a little bit, there's a few topics to it and we've covered quite a lot, Phoebe, but one part of this question that I think is amazing and we could probably finish there, is there anything about your journey that you would change or do differently?
I won't change anything. So I was thinking this the other day because I was watching my Olympia vlog, and my Olympia vlog is kind of like breaking down my from pro to Olympia debut. And I was watching it and I was like, I honestly wouldn't change a thing. Like I was listening to myself kind of saying like, you're not going to get this, or like, am I going to get this, from like 2018, 19, 20, 21. And like all of those doubts like just built up to Bill's, you know, what I have now. And like it feels so good to look back on like my old self and be like, obviously I was having those doubts, but I pushed through them regardless. And I just feel like I wouldn't want to change that. Like the outcome from the journey from 2018 to now was like perfect for me, because it really helped build my drive, build up my, you know, fan base, build up my journey, build up my career. And then finally getting to the Olympia and shocking everyone, it was like the cherry on top of the cake. So for me, it was like, I wouldn't want to change that at all. So no, definitely not. It's hard in the moment because I think maybe, you know, I would want it to be easier, but actually it just built me up to be who I am today. So I wouldn't have wanted a different journey, because I feel like it wouldn't have created what I have now. For sure.
I love that because I think as bodybuilders is, we can be so self-critical and we can always find ways. I know I'm thinking back to my last prep, I'm like, I could have done this, could have done this. But ultimately, like you said, like you have to appreciate that every step that you took got you to where you want to be. And maybe you're not where you want to be just yet, but everything you're doing now, you will eventually end up where you're supposed to be with the results that you want, you know, if you just kind of keep going and appreciating where you are. And that's what makes all our journeys as athletes so unique. You know, of course you could say I did this prep differently, but ultimately your journey is your journey and your prep is your prep. You know, and you made the decisions because that's what you need to make. So yeah, I really, really like that.
No, I would change it for the world. And I think sometimes people, like I said, people do want their journeys to be a little bit easier, or I wish I got my pro card then, or I wish I got that Olympian qualification then. But again, it adds more fuel to the fire. It just makes you want to get better. And like, it will eventually happen if you keep putting those, you know, thoughts out there and putting one foot in front of the other to get to that goal, you know? So yeah, no, I wouldn't change it for the world. I love looking back on it and being like, fuck, we struggled to get here, but like it was such a great struggle, you know? And yeah, I wouldn't change it.
The struggle makes it, from like a outward person looking in as well. Like you said earlier, it makes it achievable. It makes it feel obtainable for people who are on that path and who want the same things or similar things. It just makes, having been able to observe you fight through those things and still come out on top and achieve the things that you wanted. Yeah, it's amazing. Definitely fuels the fire.
I love it so much. And like the journey just is, it makes it more interesting. And like I said before, like Adam said, it just adds to your story as well. So yeah, I definitely feel like it's something that's hard to admit sometimes, but it's something that's definitely worth it for sure.
Yeah. Oh, I appreciate you kind of, I suppose, just going in depth about it. And I suppose even just on YouTube being so honest, because even just going back to what I said, it just makes it so humane and relatable, and it makes us amateurs be able to kind of push through the struggles that we're having as well, and that it's not just a point, right, you need to stop here, do you know, kind of way. And we can get to that level if you just kind of keep going. So that's amazing. Thank you.
No, of course.
Amazing. So we'll wrap up this podcast here, guys. Phoebe, again, just massive thank you, and we hope you guys enjoyed this podcast. Phoebe, do you want to let people know where they can find you, information on the posing portal, all that kind of thing?
So if you want to find me, like I was speaking about before, YouTube's, it's just Phoebe Hagan. And then if you want to join to the posing portal, it's just theposingportal.com. And then Instagram, Phoebe Hagan. And yeah, all the information you can get from there.
Amazing. I'm sure we're all going to be glued to your YouTube and whatnot. I can't wait to see all the videos. I'm sure it's going to be incredible. So yeah, well done to Max as well for being such a good editor.
I know he's been a great help. That helps a lot, having your own videographer and editor, if I'm honest. So it's great.
So cinematic.
It's a lot easier.
Yeah, it's so cinematic.
He's really like come into his own with his filming and stuff, and like it captures everything that like the journey's been. I just wish that I could capture him within like him videoing it a little bit more, because that would be so fun. So but no, thank you guys for watching.
It's been amazing to have you on. Jade, last words?
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Phoebe. Massive good luck at the Arnolds. We'll be watching and cheering on as we were, and of course over the next season for you, but can't wait to see what you do and how you shock the rest of the world like you did this time around. So it's gonna be amazing.
I'm so excited.
Amazing.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Phoebe. Chat soon.